All right, so we've got our player moving, we've got him attacking, but our attack doesn't actually interact with anything at the moment. Right now, it's just an animation, which while it looks like an attack, it isn't actually going to have an effect on our enemies once we get them into the game. So what we need to do is create what's called a hurt box. A hurt box is essentially a trigger that's going to deal damage to the enemy when the enemy is touched by it. So to do that, what we're going to do is right-click here in our hierarchy. We're going to right-click, go to 3D Object, and select Capsule. It can spawn in just about anywhere. Sometimes it'll spawn right in front of your camera. Sometimes it'll spawn way, way over here in the distance. So what we can do is go to our knight here, and in his transform component, we can actually click these three little dots up here in the top right and select Copy Component. What we can then do is click on our capsule and go to the three dots and select Paste Component Values. What that'll do is paste those position values that our knight has onto our capsule, putting it in the exact same spot as our knight. Then we can use these gizmos in the scene view to drag them around. If you don't see the three little arrow guys to move your object in the scene view, you can press the W key and that'll show that up. Sometimes you'll see this or this. Just press W while you have it selected and you'll get these arrows. Next, what we want to do is rename it. We're going to rename this to sword, and then we're going to adjust our scale. So this is obviously pretty massive in comparison to our sword. We want them to be as close to the same size as we can. So what we're going to do is drop in our transform component the scale value for X to 0.2 and hit enter. Same with Z, 0.2. And we're going to drop Y down to 0.5. Now we've got a much more appropriately sized capsule here. It's much closer to what our sword looks like. What we then need to do is go to our mesh renderer component, and in this little checkbox next to where it says mesh renderer, we're just going to click that. That's going to turn off what's called the mesh, which is our model, the visual thing associated with our capsule in the game view. And then we need to drop down to our capsule component and select is trigger. This is important because we want the enemies to pass through the sword. We don't want the sword to block things. We don't want it to be like a solid object. We want it to be, pass-throughable, if that makes sense. Next, we need to add a rigid body component. Rigid bodies are required to make sure that collisions or hitting a trigger will actually register. If one of the things in the collision or in the trigger interaction does not have a rigid body component, the Unity will not recognize it as having collided or as having entered the trigger. So we'll add that, and you'll notice that when it's added, this use gravity function or this use gravity field is checked. We want that to be off because we don't want our sword hurt box to fall off the sword because of gravity. We want it to float alongside it. So we're gonna go ahead and uncheck that. So once you have all that, you are ready to go.